excited to be with you again, coming from my basement again to you. So apologize, but this week and next, that's what it's going to look like for our trainings, unfortunately. And I was actually even just thinking this morning of like, I am so sick of doing these trainings and things over Zoom and having to do them virtually, even though I know we've done a bunch and had people there. So just looking forward to once we get through all this and we can be all just get back in a room together and learn, because I feel like it's so much better. At least I enjoy it more when we're doing that. So, all right. Well, and I see a few people starting to throw their first and last name in the chat box, which is awesome. If you'll do that, I would appreciate it. And we're going to get rocking and rolling here. So what we're going to be talking about today is activities management, which really is just kind of a sneaky way for me to tell you we're talking about time management. So this is going to be a time management class. But before you all hang up and leave me, stick around, because I'm going to do this a little bit different approach, meaning we're going to talk about it in terms of time management for the for you as an agent, in terms of you doing it in terms of real estate. So it's going to be a little bit different approach than probably what you've seen before in terms of talking about time management things. And we're just going to do it through real estate. Now, some of you, if you saw my morning ascent that I did, whatever day it was last week, I talked briefly about this. And so you may have seen briefly a little bit about it, but we're going to talk a little bit more about it. And I'm actually very hot right now, so I'm going to take off my jacket. Hope you don't mind. All right, in fact, actually, that just reminded me. When I went to, total side note, has nothing to do with the class, but just as I took my jacket off, when I went through real estate school to get my broker's license, there was about 4 of us that were in this class. So it was a class that we would meet, I don't remember, 2-3 times a week. And we would show up, and we had 3 different instructors, I think, that would come and teach us. And there was this one guy, I wish I could remember his name now, although it's probably better if I don't say it once I'm going to tell you what had happened. But we would go to class, and it kind of became the joke, because he would start the class always with a jacket on, like what I just had on. And then what would end up happening is partway through, he would take it off. And then a little bit later, he would undo his tie and undo the button. And then pretty soon he was undoing his sleeves and rolling them up. And then he would take off his shoes, and like we were always like, okay, stop, enough, no more. Like, we don't need to see anything else. So anyway, as I just took off my jacket is what that reminded me of. So I will not undress any further than I am right now. Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to do. So we're going to go through and we're going to be talking about this in terms of time management. And part of what I'm going to do is talk to you guys about a schedule today as well, and helping you to understand what the schedule needs to look like. Yeah, Bria, he actually would take off his shoes. It was crazy. It was weird, actually. Like, and he would do it every class. He would go that same thing. And it was always just throughout the class, he would slowly start to undress. Yeah, I know, it was weird. All right. So let's get going on this. So here's where we're going to start with this. Is I'm going to talk to you about a few principles first. And the first one I'm going to talk to you guys about is a guy by the name of C. Northcott Parkinson. Now, I don't anticipate that probably any of you have ever heard of him before, but C. Northcott Parkinson lived around the turn of the century. In fact, actually was working on his PhD thesis in 1930. And what I'm going to show you, in fact, let me just get this pulled up here so that I can share my screen with you so you can see what we're going to talk about here, is I'm going to share with you a couple of principles that C. Northcott Parkinson came up with, which I know you're not seeing anything yet. I haven't shared it yet. But we're going to talk about some principles that he discovered, because in a lot of ways, this guy, C. Northcott Parkinson, he kind of is the father of business consulting. So if you think about in terms of like businesses will go out and hire a consultant to come in and to analyze their company and help them figure out what they need to do to change. Well, C. Northcott Parkinson's kind of the father of that, and it came out of this study that he was doing as part of his PhD thesis in 1930. And so what I'm going to share with you now is a couple of the principles that he came up with. And so this first principle that he came up with is called the law of expansion. And what he found is this, is, hang on, let me do one thing here on my screen to make it a little easier for me to see. Okay, what he found is this: work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Now, what he found then is that he was studying the ships in the port of Southampton. So he was studying the Royal Navy in England, and he came across these principles in this study, and he then created these laws that are called Parkinson's laws. And so we're going to talk about two of the laws that he found as he did this study. And this first one is that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. What that basically means is this. If you tell yourself, I am going to go to work today, and I am going to work today from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., what will happen is you will go to work, and work will expand so as to fill the time available for its completion. And for me, I shared with you guys, I've shared with you the story about how I was doing 50 contacts a day. And back when I talked about that, I would consistently show up to the office by 9 a.m. After I had gotten to the office at 9 a.m., I would go and do some role play. Shirley and I would go out door knocking. We'd come back to the office, go eat lunch. We would then get on the phone and make phone calls until 4-ish, and then I would do whatever I needed to do, and I'd go home for the day. Well, I would go home feeling like I had worked really hard. And I'm going to share with you a story today that you heard me already tell it if you were at Morning Ascent, but about how this became so eye-opening for me when I really realized what Parkinson was talking about here is that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So you'll show up to work and say, I'm going to be at the office today from 8 until 5 or 8 until 3 or whatever it is. And I'm going to help you put together a schedule today and showing you what that looks like. But just because you're at the office is not the same thing as being productive. So essentially, that's what he's saying here is being productive is not the same thing as being at work. See, because work will expand to fill the time available for its completion. You will fill up your day and then go home feeling like I worked really hard today. Look at all this stuff that I did, meaning I was there the entire time that I said I would be, but it doesn't end up then equating to productivity. See, and so as a result of that, what happens is we then feel like we did all this great stuff. Well, see, in other jobs that you have had, potentially that worked. Meaning if you were on a salary or you were getting paid hourly, showing up and just being at work and having work expand to fill the time available for its completion is fine because you got paid the same either direction. But with what you're doing now in real estate, it doesn't work that way. Meaning if you show up and you just are there, you could be there and you'll also be broke at the end because you don't make the time that you are at work to be productive. So the first one is this: work expands to fill the time available for its completion. All right. Now, here's what he was studying when he found this. So how he came up with that was this. So this is the study that he did in 1930. And here's what he noticed is in 1914, the number of ships that the Royal Navy had in commission was 62. And in 1928, that number had dropped to 20. Now, part of why you would look at that and go, well, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, World War I was over, so they didn't need as many ships anymore. Okay, fine. So the number of ships decreased by 67%. The officers and men in the Royal Navy went from 146,000 down to 100,000, so it decreased 31%. The dockyard workers, though, actually increased. Dockyard officials and clerks increased by 40%, and the Admiralty officials increased by 78%. So now notice that. The number of ships that the Royal Navy had in commission decreased by 67%, but then the Admiralty and officials and the dockyards and clerks, those two added together, essentially went up 120%. They increased the number of people dramatically, even though the number of ships went down. Now, what Parkinson found as he was studying this is exactly what we just said. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. See, what will happen in any business? This happens in any business. So keep in mind, if you've been through the business planning class, you are a business. So you're not a self-employed person, you are a business owner. And in any business, if it is not managed carefully, what is going to happen is that the busy work is going to increase. So the admiralty and officials, the dockyard officials and clerks, the upper management then becomes very top heavy. And that will happen in any business if it's not managed carefully. And the reason is because what will happen is something like this. You're going to hear somebody talk about some social media marketing, or you're getting phone calls from people of like, we'll do this for you, we'll do that for you. And what happens is we start to think, oh, well, it would be good to have that. I probably should do that. Maybe we should hire somebody. Now, in real estate, we don't tend to end up hiring somebody, but instead we say, well, I should spend a little bit more time doing this. And maybe if I spend a little more time on a marketing campaign for social media, that would help me a lot. See, work expands to fill the time available for its completion. And that's what we've got to be watching out for. Okay, next, the second law that he found. So we're going to talk about two of his laws. The second one that he came up with is this. It's called the law of triviality. And what he found is this. Time spent on any item of the agenda will be in inverse proportion to its importance. Now, I know when you read that right now, it sounds like, okay, we're talking about a meeting here because we're saying an agenda. But this happens with your day as well. So what he found was this: as he studied this Royal Navy, he noticed that in their meetings, that the time that they would spend on any item of an agenda would be in inverse proportion to its importance, meaning they would spend the most amount of time talking about the least important things and the least amount of time talking about the most important things. Well, how does that apply to you and I? It's very similar. What happens is this: the amount of time you and I will spend working on projects for our real estate will be in inverse proportion to its importance. We will work on the things that don't contribute much business to us a lot, and we will do very little of the things that are going to increase our business dramatically. All right. Now, so the third principle that we're going to talk about, this one did not come from C. Northcott Parkinson. This one is from Vilfredo Pareto. So you guys have heard of the Pareto principle. You may or may not have known it was called that, but you've heard of the 80-20 rule. Well, that was discovered by a guy by the name of Vilfredo Pareto. Vilfredo Pareto was an Italian economist. And essentially what he found is this, and this fits in too with what Parkinson found in that law of triviality, is 80% of our time is spent on activities that only make a 20% contribution to our business. And that 20% of our time is spent on activity. Sorry, I said that backwards, I think. 80% of our time is going to contribute to 20% of our income. So we spend I still think I said that wrong, sorry. We will spend a whole bunch of time on things that are not going to make much of a contribution. They're going to contribute 20% to our income. But then we will spend 20% of our time on things that contribute to 80%. So part of what I want you to see today as we go through and talk about this is a small increase in your productivity will lead to a huge increase into your income. So meaning, like, sometimes what happens is this: we see people who are really productive real estate agents making a ton of money, and our thought becomes, well, I wouldn't want to have to work as hard as that. I don't want to give up my life. Like, I promise you, you have either had this thought already or you're going to, of, well, I see those people making $1 million a year in real estate, and my family's more important to me than that. Like, I want you to understand that is something that goes on in your head. But here's the thing: because 80% of the things that we do only contribute to 20% of our income, just reducing that 80% and increasing the 20% of the activities. So looking at this chart here that I've got, if you were to say there's 10 bars here, these two are going to contribute to 80% of your business, but this red line shows how much time we spend on those things. See, we spend very little time in this area, and we spend a ton of time in all the rest of these areas that don't contribute any income to us. And we're going to talk about why that is in just a minute. All right, so here's what I'm going to give you an example of how this law of triviality works. This is a study that was done in the Wall Street Journal about the Boston School District. Now, who makes up, and so this one I'm expecting some answers on. So who makes up school boards? Where do they come from? Like the school boards in a school district. Who makes up the board?
Parents?
Yeah, good. So typically it's going to be parents, it'll be some administrators, but a lot of times it is the parents that end up being on these school boards. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through and talk about this. So what happened here is I'm going to show you this study that was done in the Wall Street Journal and about the Boston School District. Now, what happened was this. They were having a meeting, and remember, the people who make up the board are parents typically. And there were two items on the agenda. This meeting was supposed to last for 1 hour. And there were two items that were going to be discussed on this meeting agenda. And as a result of what, oops, I got somebody making background noise. Here's somebody's baby crying here. All right, I think I got you all. All right, so there were two items on the agenda. And what ended up happening is one of the items was for $1.5 million, and the difference between the high bid and the low bid was $200,000. The other item on the agenda was a $200,000 item, and the difference between the high and the low bid was $20,000. Now, what ended up happening is this, is the $1.5 million item was a building that they were going to be building, a new annex for a school. And the $200,000 item, I'm not going to share with you just yet what that was for. But as they went through and discussed this, what ended up happening is this. So there was two items on the agenda. They put the $200,000 item first. And now remember, the difference between the high bid and the low bid on that $200,000 item was $20,000. They spent 57.5 minutes discussing this $200,000 item. And then what ended up happening is I guess the difference was $10,000. They ended up taking the low bid, so they saved $10,000. They then spent 7.5 minutes, so the meeting went over. It was supposed to be a 1 hour meeting. They spent 57.5 minutes talking about a $200,000 item and took the low bid, so they saved $10,000. Then they spent 7.5 minutes talking about this $1.5 million annex, and they took the high bid or spent an extra $200,000. Now, here's the question for you. What do you think they were discussing that was a $200,000 item, the school board, that they spent 57.5 minutes talking about and then ended up actually saving $10,000? Now, I think a couple of you have been on here and seen this before, so maybe don't share if you already know the answer. But for you guys that don't know, either unmute or throw it in the chat box. What do you think they were talking about for 57.5 minutes that then they saved $10,000 on? Yeah, don't spoil it, Nick. I'll let you give the answer in a minute, Nick, if you want. But what do the rest of you guys think? Supplies, okay, what kind? You're on the right track. What kind of supplies? What do you think?
I'm just going to throw pencils out there.
Okay, you're on the right track, but simpler than that. So Braxton said computers or iPads. Nope. This was before the iPad that this study took place, actually, but not books. Simpler than that. Now, keep in mind who's on the school board. Parents. Now, that may not give you much of a hint, but saying like the parents are probably not going to sit and talk about too much of the school supplies, like the number of pencils and things like that. All right, Nick, spoil it for them. Throw it out there.
Toilet paper.
There you go. Good job. Yeah. They spent 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper. Now, why? Here's the thing. Make sure you understand this, because if you can understand why they spent 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper to save $10,000, but yet only spent 7.5 minutes on the building and chose the high bid, this will change the way you approach your real estate career. So any ideas? Why would they do that? Now, this is the part, keep in mind, the school board's made up of parents, just regular everyday people like you and I.
They all had an opinion about it.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's see. COVID. Yeah, I didn't even think about the COVID toilet paper shortage, Braxton. Yeah, but this was all before that. But yeah, so what I think that was Philip. What he said is correct. Is we are all familiar with toilet paper. Now, and here's the thing. Now, this is where typically, if I was in class, I'd have you all raise your hand. But I'm not sure how many of you have your screen turned on. Maybe that's what I ought to do is make you guys like turn on your screen so I could actually see you all. But David has his on. But how many of you have purchased in the last little while, or someone in your family has purchased toilet paper? See, if David, oh, I was going to say, there we go. David didn't raise his hand, but there he did. All right. Yeah, see, and I'm just going to assume all the rest of you did raise your hand. But yeah, we are all familiar with toilet paper. Like, we are all totally understand it. You could go to a meeting and you could sit and argue about toilet paper for 57.5 minutes. Now, let me ask you this one. How many of you in the last year wrote a check for $1.5 million? Because I didn't. See, here's the thing. The reason that they were able to sit and argue about toilet paper is because we're familiar with it. And the reason that they then chose to go with the high bid on that building is because they don't understand earthquake codes and what's going to make the kids the safest. So of course, if you're looking at the parents and they're saying, okay, we got this bid for $1.5 million and the difference between the high and the low is 200,000. Well, the 200,000 is probably going to make our kids safer. So let's go with that one because we don't know enough about it to argue about it. So they could argue effectively about toilet paper, but when it came time for the building, they couldn't. Now, the reason they could argue about toilet paper is because they're familiar with it. And so here's the question for you. Now, and I want answers on this. So either throw it in the chat box or unmute. In terms of you and real estate, what, Nick says he wrote a fake one. That's awesome. So what are the things in real estate that you are most familiar with? What are the things that don't scare you that you have done so far in real estate that are not hard, not scary? All right, I'm seeing home inspection, showing houses.
Showing someone a house.
Okay, good. Thanks, Carla. So, Bria, cold calling is not scary to you? Oh, good. You are a little bit strange then. I'm joking, but most people are not familiar with that. Okay. All right. Let's see. Been doing it for years. So that makes sense. Okay. So, but typically, what are the things that we are most familiar with? How about sitting in this class right now? Is anybody like scared and nervous to death about this class going on right now? I'm guessing that you're not. And in fact, what happens is this: we convince ourselves, well, I need the information. I probably should wait to make a few phone calls. I probably shouldn't start prospecting and calling people until I get all the information. What if somebody asks me to write an offer and I'm not really sure how to do it? What if they want me to come list their house? I don't know what paperwork I've got to use. See, what happens is in our mind, your brain plays these tricks on you where what it does is it convinces you that you need to stay safe. And so don't go do some of those things that you are least familiar with, because that is what's going on. Yeah, Carla, I get it. I've been there. And so part of what my job is to point this out to you guys so that you can see, because here's what I will promise you, it never gets better, except for Bria, it did, I guess. But it doesn't ever really go away. And if it does, it is going to be because you've done it for so long, which is, I guess, what she was saying. She's done it for years. But it is not going to go away very easily for most people. It's just something you're going to have to realize that you've got to get used to the fact that you might not enjoy it. And in fact, here's the funny thing with this is I have had two people in the last, how long has it been? I don't know, month. I've had two people contact me that are friends of mine that just have said, hey, I'm kind of sick of my job and I think I want to go do real estate. And what do you think? And here's the thought that I have had recently. In the past, so I've for 25 years, when people have asked me, I've been like, oh, it's great, man. You can make so much money and and blah, 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 and all this stuff. Well, I've almost gotten to the point now where I think here's how I'm going to start to say it to people is I think when somebody asks me, and I'm not trying to scare you guys away, although maybe it will, but to some extent, when somebody asks me again, what do you think about real estate? I'm going to say, well, let me ask you this. How do you feel about getting on the phone and making phone calls for 4 to 6 hours a day, just calling random people? And more than likely, they're going to go, well, I'm not sure I want to do that. Okay, well, welcome to that's what your career in real estate is going to look like at first. Now, that's the thing I want you guys to understand is you're going to have to pay the price to get this going. And you're going to have to be willing to do things that you are not familiar with, which is the next slide here is the things that typically most people are least familiar with is going out and talking to new people, meeting new people. That's typically what people are least familiar with. So just like that law of triviality, what ends up happening is this. You and I, because we are not familiar with it, because it's not fun typically, what ends up happening is we will look for other things to fill our day. That work expands to fill the time available for its completion. We're going to find things that will fill our day with projects and things that we could do that will allow us to feel like, well, I needed to do that. And it was important for me to learn how to write the offer and do the CMA and all these things because it's going to make us feel better in our mind before we start to prospect. See, what ends up happening is we're getting ready to get going. And we convince ourselves tomorrow's the day or next week is the day that I'm going to get it going. And here, I'm just here to tell you, it doesn't work that way. Today's the day. You got to decide that I am making it happen today and get someone that will force you to get started on doing it. All right. With that, we're going to now jump into talking about, okay, so how does this apply? How do we stop this from happening for us in real estate? Well, the way that we're going to make this take place for us is through what I call a TIP analysis. And this TIP analysis, TIP is an acronym, which I actually just realized I'm missing a dot there after the P to make it an acronym, but it's an acronym. And the T stands for total time. The I stands for indirectly productive time. And oops, I think I actually have that all up here. Yeah, T is for total time. The I is indirectly productive time, and then the P stands for productive time. Now, what I'm going to recommend for you guys is on the email that I send out to you guys, and if for some reason one of you did not get the email, then if you will put your email address in the chat box, I'll send you this. But I included with the email yesterday about this class a time tracker. And the idea of this is what you will need to do in order for you to find out how productive you are being with your time is you're going to want to use that time tracker. And I'll pull it up on the screen here in just a little bit, but I first want to go through and talk about some of these other things first. So what you have to keep track of on a daily basis is the total amount of time you spend working. And then of that total time you spend working, how much is indirectly productive and how much is productive? See, now here's how I would do this. If you came to me and you said, Russ, I want you to coach me on a one-on-one, like I want you to help me get this business up and running as fast as I can. Here's the first thing I would say to you is I would say, okay, great. Here's the time tracker. I would hand it to you. And then I would tell you, start tracking your time every day. And meaning when you're at work. So you don't need to track when you wake up and eat breakfast and all that kind of stuff necessarily. But when you consider yourself being at work, I would say start keeping track of your time. Now, I would have you track your time, and then every 15 minutes, I would have you write down what you did. Now, for me, let me explain how this happened for me. This guy that's become a mentor for me and trained me in a lot of the stuff that I teach you guys in now, he was the one who introduced me to that. And what he asked me to do is to track my time every 15 minutes. Now, if you feel like that's a lot, keep in mind that the way an attorney works is they have billable hours, and they are required to fulfill so many billable hours every day when you work for a law firm. But they're required to do it every 6 minutes. So every 6 minutes, they have to write down what they were doing and keep track of it so that they can then bill that to their clients. Well, if you're a newer attorney, well, I don't know if it matters you're newer, but you've got to keep track of that time so that you can then bill the client and be able to show them, this is how much time I spent working on this stuff. So just keep in mind, I'm being nice by saying you only got to do it 15 minutes. If you were an attorney, you'd have to track it every 6 minutes. Well, we fall into the same category, meaning being professionals, that what an attorney or a CPA does. See, a CPA working for their clients has to track their time very similarly than that. So we have to track our time if we want to be effective and if we really want to consider ourselves as professionals. So he said, I want you to start tracking your time. And I'm going to have you track it by every 15-minute increments so that I could then know what is going on with my time. Well, the other category that is not listed as part of the acronym of TIP is N, which is non-productive. So what would happen is every activity that I did, and every 15 minutes, I would have to write down what did I do, and then I would have to write down, was it indirectly productive, was it productive, or was it non-productive? Now you're going to hear me say this a bunch of times. Non-productive does not mean not important. So keep in mind, even though it says non, it has non-productive, makes it sound like, oh, it's really bad. It's not necessarily bad, it's just not productive. And productive time is where you're going to make the big bucks. And so doing non-productive things, and I'll show you in a way that will make this make a ton of sense for you guys here in just a little bit, okay? So part of what we want to be doing here, let me stop the screen share here so they get back to just seeing me. So part of what we're going to be doing here is talking about, so what is productive? What is indirectly productive and what is non-productive? So I'm going to grab my iPad here and you're going to get to witness my horrible handwriting again like we did the other day. Oh, I got to make myself a co-host first here. All right. Get the whiteboard up here. Okay. So we've got the T, which is total time, and then we've got productive and indirectly productive. So I'm going to just start with the productive. What do you guys think? And this is where, again, I'm wanting you to have you either unmute or throw it in the chat box, either way. What do you think the productive things that we do in this business are? Meaning, what are the things that if you did it, remember we talked about the 80-20 rule. If you could spend 80% of your time doing these items, would generate the most amount of income. All right, so I see David says cold calling, Aaron says prospecting, making calls, prospecting. So actually, since you guys are saying that, I'm going to draw my other line over here and put in indirectly. I got to see if I can move the chat box off my iPad. It's right where I'm trying to write. Oops. Now I forgot what I was even writing there. Whoop. Let me get the eraser going here. All right. So the indirectly productive actually is, sorry, I turned my iPad there. So indirectly productive is actually going to be the prospecting. So you guys that are saying cold calling and those things, those are actually going to be indirectly productive. So let's see, Corbin said appointments. Good, I like that. Let me see what else we got on here. So let's see, writing contracts. Good. So productive things would be, I'm going to call it negotiating contracts, but writing contracts will count on that. So negotiating contracts, somebody said appointments. Okay, so yeah, so listing appointments, buyer appointments. What else? What else would be considered the productive things that we could do? So communicating with clients, here's the thing, you're probably not going to like this too much, but communicating with clients, depending on what, if all you're doing is updating them, I would actually throw that over here into the non-productive. Now, Remember I said non-productive does not mean not important, okay? So just because I said communicating with clients potentially is under the non-productive, and I'll explain that in just a minute. All right, let's see. Aaron said closings. Good. Yeah, closings I would add over here to being productive. What else? What else would we say? This one isn't one that we're having to deal much with, but price reductions. So getting price reductions to be productive. There's one other one. So you guys did say showing properties. And so I would say if you are showing to a buyer with a signed buyer broker, so that's what that BB is, showing properties to somebody that has signed a buyer broker agreement, I would count as productive. If you're showing to properties to somebody who has not signed a buyer broker agreement, I would then throw that over here in this indirectly productive, that you're really still prospecting. All right, so let's talk about this for a minute. So now, if that's the case, if the most productive things that you could do with your times is negotiating contracts, going on listing appointments, doing buyer appointments, closing, price reductions, and showings, those are productive. Now, here's the thing. If you were to track the time and track the 15-minute increments for agents, similar to what you and I have already talked about with these agents who are out prospecting, or excuse me, that are productive agents, and I'm talking about agents that are probably making over $100,000 a year, and probably between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. If you were to track their time, how much time do you think they spend in this category right there? What percentage of their time? Okay, I'm seeing an 80%, 75, 70. You guys are going to be surprised. Madison says 40. She's getting closer. You're getting closer, but you're still not there. %11 of their time. Typically, people who are spending or who are making between $100,000 and $200,000 a year, if you were to actually track their time and how much time they spend doing these type of things, it ends up being at 11%. Now, let me ask you this one. What about the people who end up making, let's use a top producers, somebody who's making $800, $9 million a year. How much of what percentage of their time do you think they are productive? Wow, I'm surprised. I thought for sure you guys would jump back up to the 80% again. So good job. The actual number that typically the top producing agents are still only 33% productive in their time. Meaning somebody making $1 million a year, if you tracked the number of hours that they work, the percentage that they spend doing these type of items is still only 33. So stop and look at that for a minute. I'm telling you guys that typically somebody making between $100,000 and $200,000 a year is 11% productive with their time, yet somebody making over $1 million a year is 33%. So hopefully what you are starting to see from this is just a small increase in this area makes a huge increase in the amount of money that you will make. So it's not like, this is where I was saying to you that so many times agents look at a top producing agent, somebody who's making $1 million, $2 million a year, which we have within this company, people doing, and they would look at them and go, oh, I wouldn't want their life. I'll bet they're just constantly busy. No, instead of being 11% productive, they're 33% productive, which if you stop and look at that, what does that tell you that they are doing with the other, 60+% of their time? I mean, almost 70% of their time. Yeah, Carla said prospecting. The problem is they're not necessarily spending all of that time that way. Now, so here's the thing. So keep in mind that this. So now I'm going to ask you guys to start keeping track of your time and using that sheet that I gave you. But here's what I want to make sure you guys understand first is if you will track the time and you will keep track of the number of hours that you spend doing these productive things each week, it is going to be eye-opening for you. Because here's the thing, going from being 11% productive to 20% productive is not going to double your income. It's probably going to do 4 or 5 times their income if they could just do a double of that. So here's the thing, for most of you guys on the phone, on this call with me right now, my guess would be if you tracked your time, you are significantly less than 10% of your time on a weekly basis is spent working productively. Now, because we can't just automatically, like, here's the problem is I've shared this with you, but it's not like tomorrow morning you can go, okay, tomorrow I am only going on listing appointments. I'm only doing buyer appointments. I'm only going to negotiate contracts. I'm only going to go to closings or showing buyers with a buyer broker. Like you don't get to decide that today for tomorrow. You don't get to say my entire day tomorrow is going to be spent on listing appointments necessarily today. So keep in mind that yes, we want to see an increase in the amount of time we spend in these productive areas. There's only one way for that to happen. And you guys understand what it is. And it is spent doing the indirectly productive things, which is all of your prospecting that you have to do. See, the way that we get productive is by doing indirectly productive things. So here's the thing. Here's what I want you guys to understand is the most important thing that you can do in your business is the indirectly productive things. Remember I told you just a minute ago, from now on, when people call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about getting in real estate, what do you think? I'm going to just start saying, hey, how do you feel about being on the phone and talking to random people every day for 3 or 4 hours every day? Because that's what it's going to look like if you want to be successful in this business, is you're going to have to get on and make phone calls and talk to a lot of random people that maybe you don't really necessarily want to do. Now, again, I'm not trying to be negative, but I also just am like, I want to make sure that they know that this is what it's going to look like. So for you, if you want to increase the amount of time you are productive, you have to increase the amount of time in the indirectly productive category, is what it is going to take to get you to be into that productive area. Now, everything else that you would do, so any other things that you could think of, anything that does not fall under productive or indirectly productive, guess what category it goes under? Non-productive. Doing a CMA, non-productive. Creating a flyer to go door knocking, non-productive. This is where I said calling your clients to update them as to what's gone on, non-productive. Now, the only reason I said that that could potentially turn into being indirectly productive is calling your clients is if you ask them for referrals when you call. If when you call your client to update them on what's going on in a transaction and you ask them who else they know that's thinking of buying or selling, you could then count it as an indirectly productive amount of time working. All right. Anything else that you do then falls under this non-productive category. Anything that's not prospecting or doing productive things is considered non-productive. Now, here's why. If you were to keep track of, if an agent were to do this, and there's not many willing to pay the price to do this, but if they were to keep track throughout the year, the total number of appointments they went on where they did these items here, and the amount of time they spent doing that, and then at the end of the year took their income and divided it by the number of hours they spent doing all these items, they are going to find that they are making somewhere between $500 to $1,000 and potentially even more than that per hour. So keep in mind, part of what I want you guys to see is this. every time that you go and you're negotiating contracts, you do a listing appointment, you do a buyer appointment, you go on a closing, you do a price reduction, or you're showing homes to a buyer with a buyer broker agreement. Essentially, during that time, you're being paid somewhere between $500 and $1,000 an hour, maybe even more, depending on the price range of the property. But keep that in mind. Now, here's how I usually try to say it. When you are spending time doing this indirectly productive prospecting stuff, you're probably making somewhere in the neighborhood of $125 an hour while you're prospecting. Meaning, if you were to take that same income that you made for the year and the number of hours that you spent prospecting, you're probably going to be somewhere, and again, this depends on the price range, but between $125 and $250 an hour that you get paid to do that. See, if I actually paid you to do that, so Carla earlier had said that was me about like kind of being nervous to get going. Carla, I guarantee you, if I told you tomorrow I would pay you $250 for every hour that you spend on the phone prospecting, you would all of a sudden jump on the phone and start making those calls pretty quickly. And you would probably do it a lot longer during the day than we do now. See, but the problem is for us, our getting paid this type of money is contingent upon us doing it. Meaning we have to do it first and then get paid, not the other way around, meaning me saying to you, hey, if you'll go get on the phone and make those calls, I'll pay you $250 for every hour that you're doing it. Yeah, you would do it then, but because you having to do it first and then down the road, and here's the thing that I'll tell you guys, typically this indirectly productive stuff is going to take typically 90 days before you start to see the pay come from it. So you're going to have to do it for 90 days before you really start to see the income come in from it. So part of when I say that of like, don't wait any longer, because the longer you wait to start doing the indirectly productive things is the longer until you're going to start to make some money in this business. Now, guess how much you could pay someone to do these non-productive items? How much do you think we'd have to pay somebody to do these? Okay, Corbin's saying 50 bucks. You might have some people that want to come work for you, Corbin, if you're going to pay them 50 bucks an hour. So let's see. Yeah, Carla's saying $25 an hour. Yeah, I would say somewhere in that range, $20 to $25 an hour. So here's the thing. Keep in mind, when you start keeping track of your time and you start looking at the activities that you're doing that are non-productive, things like, so part of when I said calling your clients and updating them, that is important. You need to do that. So don't hear me saying that, well, Russ said I shouldn't spend any time calling my clients. No, you should spend time calling and talking to your clients. You need to do that. Just keep in mind when you're doing it, you're basically doing a job that pays you $20 an hour to do that. Now, here's the thing. Part of what you're going to want to do, and I get asked a lot of times from people, how do I know when I should hire an assistant? And I'm going to give you the answer to that here in just a minute. But basically how you're going to know you need to hire an assistant is when you are spending 80% of your time doing these kinds of activities, it's time to hire an assistant. And actually, probably even if you're spending more than 60% of your time doing those activities, it's time to hire an assistant. But I will tell you, typically, you don't need an assistant. You just need to just get rid of some of those non-productive things that you are doing that are in your schedule that are holding you back. Because things like creating a flyer to go out door knocking, pay somebody $20 an hour to do it so that you can be doing prospecting or the other things. See, I watch agents do this all the time. I have been training new agents now for 15 years. And here's what I have found. An agent gets their first contract, they will spend the entire day writing the contract, just about. They finally get it written and submitted, they negotiate it, they get it accepted. As soon as it gets accepted, they will spend, no lie, I have watched this happen so many times, an entire day figuring out how to fill out the paperwork and get it turned in, and what do I have to do with this, and what do I have to do with that. And I'm not trying to be negative with you guys, meaning I get it. I was there and you feel like you need to do that. But the good news is we have transaction coordinators here at the company, and I would recommend that you go pay them to do all that kind of stuff, so that now that you've got this deal under contract, you can immediately start doing some more prospecting, which will lead to you to doing more productive time again. And instead of spending time doing the things that are going to pay you a very low income, get back into prospecting so that you can be making more money again. All right. Well, so let me tell you how this worked for me then. Is what ended up happening then for me was this. I ended up starting to track my time. So as I'm tracking my time with the paper that I had sent to you guys, I started tracking my time. Well, I had a particular Monday. I had gotten a listing over the weekend. I go into the office. I had started doing my prospecting and things, and I had actually set an appointment. I got done with the appointment. I went over to the title company because I had gotten this new listing and I needed to order the preliminary title report. So I go over to the title company, and my escrow officer, his name was Jeff Williams. He's with Northern Title, and he's a great guy. But I go over to Jeff Williams, and he and I are about the same age. Our oldest sons are almost like they're born within 2 months of each other. So they had a lot of things in common. And I go over to Jeff's office to talk to Jeff and to order this preliminary title report. And I don't know if it had been football season, baseball season, basketball season, what it was, but both of our boys were doing all three of those sports. And I remember I walked over there and I was just like, hey, how did the Saturday go? Whatever games they had on Saturday. And he was like, oh, I got to tell you about it. And so then he sat and told me about his games. I sat and told him about mine. Now, one of the things that I did and that I would recommend for you guys to do is either with your phone or on a smartwatch is you want to set a timer to beep every 15 minutes. Well, I had done that. And so I didn't have a smartwatch at the time. I had an Ironman triathlete watch, and it had a 15-minute timer on it. And so what I did is as I was at the office, as soon as I walked in the front door of the office, I would hit start, and then every 15 minutes it would beep. Many of the agents that were at my office got so sick of all day long, every 15 minutes, hearing a timer go off that they would start complaining to the broker because they were sick of hearing my watch timer. But I didn't care because I wanted to be more effective with my time. So I'm sitting over there talking to Jeff. I've given him the preliminary title report. We're just chit-chatting about our sons and sports and what's going on with this and that. And my watch is beeping. Well, I get done talking with Jeff, and I'm walking back to my office. And where my office was, I still know exactly where I was standing as my watch beeped, because I was just about probably 5-10 steps at the most away from my office, and my watch beeped. And I looked down, and I hit reset so that it would start to beep again in 15 minutes. Well, I took the other 5 steps or whatever it was to get into my office. I sat down, and I pulled out that piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, I looked at it and my heart just sank, because I realized that I had been gone, and basically everything I had done from the last time I had written in there was now having to be filled in with over talking to Jeff. Now, typically what most people would do is they would write in there, order the preliminary title report. Now, let me ask you guys, which category does ordering the preliminary title report fall under? Productive, indirectly productive, or non-productive? Yeah, non-productive. Yeah, no, it's non-productive. So that's right. So I come back from there, I sit down, and I go to write in that I've been over ordering the preliminary title report. And what I notice is it has been 2 hours. I walked over to his office, and 2 hours later, I went back to my office. That's when the light bulb turned on for me on this, was I realized, holy cow, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. See, my guess is I had done that probably many, many times. And honestly, if you would have asked me though, if I wouldn't have been keeping track of it, if you would have asked me at the end of the day, how much time did you spend over talking to Jeff to order that preliminary title report? I guarantee you I would have said 30, 45 minutes at the most. But what I found by keeping track of it was 2 hours that I had spent there. And as soon as that happened, Jeff is a good friend even still today to me. He is still a good friend, but I will tell you, I don't want to spend 2 hours of my day just sitting and chit-chatting with Jeff, because again, as you've already seen, like that is not something, in fact, that one actually probably, there probably is a fourth category we could add. You got productive, indirectly productive, non-productive. That one was actually category number 4, which is counterproductive. Like that was actually probably counterproductive. So meaning, like I said, you're making $500 to $1,000 an hour productive, 125 indirectly productive, $20 an hour doing the non-productive. That counterproductive, I probably should have paid somebody $100 an hour that I was sitting over there, because it was so counterproductive to what I was doing. See, but once that light bulb clicked on for me is when my career took off at that point, guys. Because what happened is I realized right then is, if I'm going to be at work, I'm going to be at work. I'm not going to sit there and hang out and just do nothing and chit chat all day with Jeff. I actually want to be productive with my time and make sure that I am making a lot of money. And so as a result, it totally changed what that looked like for me. All right. So any questions so far? I'm going to pull up that activity sheet here. No questions, huh? All right, let me pull up this daily work tracker. So hopefully you all got a copy of this when I sent out the email. But this is what it looks like here. This is the daily work tracker. So I have it set up. Now, here's the thing. You will notice that I have written across the side there, power comes out of telling the truth. That is a mantra that I live by. It is one of the first principles that for me is probably the guiding principle of my life, is power comes out of telling the truth. Now, here's what I mean by that. Telling the truth is an active and a constructive process. Telling the truth is not just the words that we say, but it's basically the way that we live and everything is what I mean by that. Now, so here's what I mean for this with you. The reason I put that on there, this power comes out of telling the truth, is because if you lie to yourself about what you were doing in a 15-minute increments, you're hurting yourself. You're not hurting anybody else. It just hurts you because you are cheating yourself, making yourself think you're more productive than you really are. So part of why I say, if you came to me and said, help me get this business up and running, the first thing I'm going to do is say, great, start tracking your time. Keep track of where your time is being spent. And then, so what you want to do is you would fill this out and you just put in what you did during the last 15 minutes. So far for the last hour, you would be putting in here from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock right here, you would just putting in class. And then I would put a big N off to the side of this because that's non-productive. Now, don't everybody hang up and leave, because I told you I would show you how this is all going to play out for you here in a minute. But throughout your day, you just keep writing down what you're doing. And then at the end of the day, you're going to put total up how many hours did you work? And of that total hours, how many hours were indirectly productive and how many of them were productive? So for me, if I know that I have spent 10, let's just to make the math easy, that I did 10 hours total today work, I would write in 10 here. If I prospected for 2 hours, I'm going to put a 2 in right there. And let's say that I had one appointment that I went on, and I would have put a 1 there. Oh, I forgot one thing I was going to ask you guys, except for I deleted it. Shoot. What, on that productive things, what did all those things have in common? What did all of those productive activities, what do they have in common? Forgot to point that out, sorry. What do all of those things have in common? I see Corbin said stuff, but I think that was before I asked this question. So let me just remind you, in case you didn't write it down, is listing appointments, buyer appointments, negotiating contracts, price reductions, closing, showing homes to a buyer who's signed a buyer broker. So Andy says paperwork. Okay, you're on the right track, but what do you mean by paperwork? Okay, so what? And Bria's saying they lead to a paycheck. Yes, absolutely. But so does the indirectly productive. They all come after a lead. I like that idea. Things that are already in a pipeline. Okay, good. How about this? Think of it this way. The reason those things are productive is because every one of those things, you're going to ask somebody to sign something. So when you go on a listing appointment, the expectation is you're going to ask them to sign something. You go on a buyer appointment, your expectation is you're going to ask them to sign a buyer broker. You go on, you negotiate contracts. You're asking your clients or the other clients to sign a contract. You get a price reduction. You're asking your client to sign a contract. You go to closing, they're signing the contracts. You show homes to a buyer with a buyer broker. The expectation is you're going to write an offer at the end of that. All 6 of those things, what they have in common is you are at the end of the appointment going to ask them to sign something. So that's how you're going to decide. So when you are keeping track on here of trying to decide was it a productive appointment or not, then what you're looking at is when you went on the appointment, was your primary objective to ask them to sign something at the end of that appointment? Because if your primary objective was to ask them to sign something at the end of the appointment, you probably are safe in calling it as a productive time. See, that's what I mean by this power comes out of telling the truth, is if you lie to yourself up here and call something as a productive appointment and it really wasn't, because you went to the appointment knowing you weren't going to ask them to sign anything. If you know going to the appointment you're not going to ask them to sign something, count it as indirectly productive. Count it as prospecting. But if you're going there with the idea of I'm going to ask them to sign something, count it as a productive appointment. That's how you're going to decide. Okay, so at the end of the day, you're putting in your total hours worked, how many of the hours, and you're putting in a total here, was indirectly productive, and how many were productive. And then all the rest is N. The reason I don't throw the N on there is because it's everything else. Anything that's not indirectly productive or productive is non-productive. Now, again, keep in mind that non-productive is not the same thing as not important. So keep that in mind, and I'll show you why here in just a second. All right, so what you're going to want to do then is you got to keep track of all of that time that you're spending doing those things. And then at the end of the day and at the end of the week, you're going to want to write it down and then go total all those things up. All right, I'm going to go back to the whiteboard here for a second. So what you're going to want to do then is total all those things up. So weekly, what you want to do is then look at it, and let's just say that I worked 50 hours this week, okay? So that's going to be the total hours that I worked is 50. So of that, then I'm going to look at it and say, okay, how much time did I spend doing I-time activities, which is the indirectly productive time? How much time did I spend in that area? Well, let's just say that I did 10 hours of that. And then how many hours did I spend in productive things? And I'm going to come back to the indirectly productive in 1 second too, to explain one other thing on it. But let's say that out of that 50 hours that I spent 5 on doing some type of appointments, okay? So at the end of the day now, or the week, excuse me, I'm going to look at this and go, okay, so I spent 50 hours total working. I had 10 hours that was indirectly productive. So that would be 20% of my time was spent there. And then this productive time is going to be 10% productive. So if I add those two together, I had spent 30% of my time in those areas. Well, if that's the case, then by default, I know that I spent 70% of my time non-productively. Now, here's what I want you guys to understand. Your objective that you are trying to accomplish on a weekly basis is you want to have these two added together to equal a minimum of 60% of your time. And which means this could be 40%. So now remember, I keep saying to you that non-productive is not the same thing as not important. See, I'm allowing for you to spend 4 out of 10 of your hours doing non-productive things, like almost half. So keep in mind that that's kind of what we're trying to look for is this. These two added together you want to every week equal 60% or more of your time. If you can do that, you will be successful in this business. Because here's the thing, if you came to me, and let's just say that you came to me and said, Russ, I'm struggling. I'm having a hard time getting my career up and running, or even down the road. If you were to come to me and say, hey, I'm struggling, I feel like I'm in a slump. First thing I'm going to do, go track your time and let's see how much of it is being spent between indirectly and productive and how much is in non-productive. The problem is that I already told you guys that most people are going to be less than 10% in this productive time and probably at 10% in the indirectly productive time. So if you add those together, they're spending 20% of their time. And keep in mind, that plays right into that 80-20 rule, that typically what ends up happening is we spend 80% of our time on things that contribute to 20% of our income. And we will spend 20% of our time. See, that's what I'm wanting you guys to see, is how this plays out, that the little bit of time that you spend in I and P time directly make a huge impact on your business. Now, so I said I was going to come back to the I time. There's a couple things I want to highlight for that. That I time, when it comes to the indirectly time, that time, nobody cares about that time. Nobody. Your clients don't care if you do it. Your family, they might care if you do it. But I guess what I'm saying is this. If you don't get on the phone and make your calls, nobody is going to call you up and say, hey, I was expecting to hang up on you today, and you didn't call me and allow me to hang up on you. Why not? See, nobody's going to do that. If you don't make your calls, nobody cares. Meaning you should, but nobody is going to complain if you don't do your prospecting calls. Because of the type of a business we are in, nobody's going to call you up and go, hey, why didn't you make your phone calls? Your manager's probably not calling you up and saying, hey, Carla, did you make your calls today? Like, I mean, are you guys getting that on a daily basis from anybody? Because I'm guessing you're probably not. But yet, here's the thing. The most important thing in your schedule is this I time. Because what I already told you is the I time is what is going to lead you over here to the P time. And so here's what I'm saying to you. If you have no listing appointments tomorrow, this week, today, you have no buyer appointments today, tomorrow, this week, you have no negotiating contracts to do, you don't have any closings, you're not doing any price reductions, you don't have any buyers that with a buyer broker that you're showing properties to, where should all your time be spent? And obviously that's an obvious answer right here in I time, right? So at the end of the day, you got to look at this and just be saying, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that I am spending the time in those areas? Now, with that being the case, well, actually, let me pause real quick. What questions do you guys have first on this? I had to close the chat box for a minute, so let me see. There's nothing in the chat box. All right, thanks, Aaron. All right, hopefully this is helpful for you guys to be able to see this. Like I'm telling you, I have a good friend that I trained in this, that early on in my training career, I trained this guy in this. And I went to lunch with him about a year ago and was talking to him. And I was talking to him about the tip analysis. And I said, hey, his name's Craig. I said, Craig, do you still use the tip analysis? And he said, oh, every day. And let me rephrase that, because he said, here's what happens is when I feel like my business is off at all, I immediately start to track my time again, and I do it just long enough to figure out where I've gotten off track, and then I'm back on track and I don't keep track. So I don't want you to think he's doing it like forever every day, but if he feels like he's off track. Now, here's the thing. I went to lunch with him about a year ago and I asked him too, hey, how much money are you making right now? And he had made, the year before that, he had made $600,000 and he was on track to do about $650,000. And I said, and you still track your time? And he goes, yeah. Typically, if I feel like I'm off schedule, I'm off track, Like if I notice a drop in my income, I immediately go back to tracking my time. So keep in mind, this is not something that I'm just throwing out at you guys. It works. And if you'll track your time, it will make a big impact in your business. All right, let's go to the next step then on this. So the next thing I wanted to talk about with you guys is basically a schedule. And I'm going to give you what, in my opinion, is the ideal schedule you should follow. Now, recognize that even though I'm going to give you this ideal schedule that I think you should follow, you may not be able to, meaning you might look at it and go, well, I can't do that because I got to go, do blah, blah, blah during that time, like whatever it is. But here's the key thing. If you will just make sure that what you do is work it similar to what I'm going to show you, it will work. And so here's what I would recommend for you. Your schedule should start the night before. The reason it's the night before is to make sure you get to bed on time and so that you can get up. So in the morning, what I would recommend for you guys that you do is, oops, sorry, I don't know what happened there. All right, I would recommend that you get to bed on time the night before so that you can get up. In the morning, the things that you need to make sure that you are doing every day that I would recommend for you to do in the morning is some type of reading. So in the morning, get up and do some reading. Also, exercise. You need to do some form of exercise on a daily basis. Now, I hate that I'm going to say this one, but I'm going to say it anyway. Make sure that you are showering every day. Now, sometimes people will laugh at that, but I'm telling you what, I've had a few times where I've gone down to stand to listen to agents make calls, and thankfully this has not happened for a couple of years. It's been a few years since this happened. So if any of you that I've listened to calls, I'm not talking about you. So specifically David, I'm not talking about you. But I have gone down to stand next to somebody to make calls, and you could just have that, like you can just tell either their clothes are dirty or they haven't showered, whatever it is. My son is on his baseball team. I gave a ride to one of the other kids on the team. The kid got in the car and I immediately was like, 12-year-olds stink. I hate it. So here's the thing. Make sure you're showering every day, that you're clean. Here's the thing is that is something most people are probably not going to tell you, ooh, you stink, but just make sure you don't stink. So you should do that. All right. So every morning you should be doing those things. Some form of reading, get some exercise in. So exercise your body, your mind, and then get clean before you come to the office. All right. Then here's the thing. So then we do every morning at 8 a.m. is morning ascent. Now, I don't know if we have anyone from California on right now. If we do, for you guys, it's going to be at 7 a.m. But you should be attending morning ascent every day. I am telling you that the reason, when I ask people, why are you not attending morning ascent? They will usually say stuff, I've already heard all of that stuff before. Well, I have been here for 5 years, and in the 5 years, I have attended the majority of morning ascents and taught many of them. So I know I've heard the stuff, but I'm telling you, you're going to pick up new things along the way, and it is going to help you get your day going right. So morning ascents from 8 until 8:30, 8:45, somewhere in that range. 9 o'clock should be prospecting time. And I think you should prospect somewhere between at least 9 to 11, but I'm going to just say on here from 9 to noon is going to be your prospecting time. Plan to be prospecting from 9 to noon. 12 o'clock, you can go grab some lunch. Then at 1 o'clock should be lead follow-up. Now, you may do some of your lead follow-up during your prospecting, and that's fine. Then do another hour of prospecting at 1 o'clock if that's what you're going to do. 2 o'clock should be appointment prep. Oops. 2 o'clock is when you're going to do your appointment prepping. So now this is when you set aside to do it. Now, here's why I say that. Because here's what I watch happen a lot is and again, this for 15 years, I have gone and stood next to agents and prospected with them. And here's what I notice is 9 o'clock in the morning, they get on the phone, they start making some phone calls. 9:30, they set an appointment, or they get somebody that says, yeah, we've thought about it. Could you give us an idea what our home's worth? And the agent's like, yeah, I'll do that. And when could I drop it off to you? And they get an appointment to drop it off later in the day or tomorrow or whatever. The agent immediately quits prospecting and goes over and starts researching and doing the CMA for the client. Well, that's not, if you look at your schedule, you're prospecting during that time. I didn't write in there do appointment prep during that time. That's prospecting time. So you just set it aside. And I know, especially if you're new, it's going to kill you to be like, but I need to go do it because I don't know how long it's going to take me to get that ready. I'm telling you, just decide I will do it during my appointment prep time, which is at 2 o'clock. Nick, guilty. Yeah. Hey, this isn't my first rodeo, Nick. I've been there and I've done it. Everything I'm telling you guys, I learned firsthand because I did it first. So I know what you're going through. But just decide, hey, okay, I'll get to it later. And I know that's going to be very, very difficult. But if you'll do that and save that till this 2 o'clock time frame, 3 o'clock should be scheduled for an appointment, and then 5 o'clock for an appointment. And then decide that one day of the week that you will also, I've run out of space here, so I'll just put it up over here. One day a week, or maybe 2 days a week, that you will do a 7 p.m. appointment. Now, let me tell you that our top producing agent that we have in Utah, his name is Brian Burnett. He's down in St. George. He's on track to make $1.6 million this year. What I just gave you is essentially his schedule. One day a week he will do, and actually I take it back, his one day a week is a 6 o'clock appointment. His objective is to be home by 6 o'clock every day except for one day out of the week. Now on Saturdays for him, he will work from 9 until noon on Saturdays if he has appointments. Or if he doesn't have appointments and he didn't set enough appointments throughout the week for him, then he goes and works that Saturday from 9 to noon. If he has no appointments and he met his goal in terms of appointments set for the week, he'll take the Saturday off. But that is his schedule right there for you guys to see. Is he essentially follows this every day, prospecting from 9 until noon. Actually, I think he might start at 8 actually, until 8 to 11. But here's the thing. So what do you do? So I've not had you guys very engaged. I apologize. So I'm going to get you engaged again. What do you do if I'm a brand new agent and I have no appointments at 3, no appointments at 5? What should I be doing? Yeah, Nick said prospecting. That's right. See, the idea is if we go back to this here, if you don't have any of the P time appointments, then you got to just loop back over here and do the I time stuff. The I time is what leads to the P time. So here's what I'm going to tell you guys. So let me kind of go with this, and then I'm going to answer whatever questions you guys have, and we'll wrap it up. But of your I time, that is the only thing you can control, meaning that you can't decide tomorrow I want to have appointments if you didn't prospect. It's going to take prospecting, but you can decide I'm going to prospect. And so what you need to be doing is just tracking your time and making sure that you are at 60% of your time is spent between I and P time. And if you have no P time appointments, you need a bunch of I time, the indirectly productive, the prospecting. Well, here's the thing. If you will track your time and you will end up, let's just say on a weekly basis, that you are at 60% I time. Let's just say you're brand new, so you don't have any appointments or anything. You're on the phone making your calls, and you came to me after a week and you said, Russ, I did 60% of my time, I time. Well, the first thing I'm going to look at is how many hours did you work? Because if you work 2 hours, let's say you worked 3 hours and you were like, I prospected for 1 hour and I worked 3 hours for the week. I'm probably going to look at it and go, okay, you need to work a few more hours. But notice we have not really talked about a set number of hours at all. And the reason I haven't talked about this is how many hours you should be working is because it's relevant, meaning if you came to me and said I worked 3 hours, I'm going to go, yeah, you're not going to get your business up and running at 3 hours a day or a week working. That's not going to work for you 3 hours a week. You got to do enough. But the second thing I'm going to look at is how much of your time was spent between indirectly productive and productive. Now, let's say that you said to me, hey, this week I got 60% of my time was I time. Here's how I would respond. I would say, great. 1 week doesn't tell the story. Do it again next week and let's see what happens. Now, if you came back the next week and you had 60% again and 0 on the productive time, after 2 weeks, I probably would start to look at it and go, okay, we might have a problem, but let's see what happens. Give me 1 more week of doing that 60% and let's see what happens. Now, if somebody came back to me a 3rd week and said, yep, I did it again, and I'm at 0 again, then I'm going to look at one of 2 things. Either number 1, you're lying, meaning you're saying you're prospecting and you're really not, which is possible that happens, or you're counting it as prospecting and you're not. Or number 2, we need to work on what you're saying. And here's what I have found. If someone is prospecting this much and getting 0 on the productive time, that it is because they're not asking for appointments. So that's where I would say to you, if you notice that you're prospecting and not getting appointments, you have to ask yourself the question of, am I asking for the appointment? And there's only 5 ways in the English language you can do that. And it's what time, which time, how soon, when, and where. That's it. So that's what I have found. If somebody is doing the prospecting and it's getting to productive time, so let's just say that the 2 of these added together were at 60%, meaning both sides of the equation, the indirectly productive and productive, but you're not turning it into transactions, it is most likely going to be because you're either lying about appointments, you're counting appointments you shouldn't, or you're just not asking for the business, is what I have found. See, hopefully what you guys are getting out of this is if you will actually take the time to do this stuff that I'm talking about with you right now, what you will find is it will make a huge impact in where your career goes. If you will just track your time, and I am more than happy to sit down with you once a week if you want to and analyze where you're spending your time and what's going on. And like I said, we may figure out that it's a skill set issue, that we got to work on your skill sets, but that's great. Then let's do that and we'll work on what your skill sets are looking like. But if you are consistently doing that and not turning it into production, we got to figure out what's the hang up that is getting in the way, because it shouldn't be happening like that. And the way to find out is through tracking your time. All right, let's see. Carla said the 5 again. Yeah, the only 5 ways you can ask for an appointment. What time, which time, how soon, when, and where. What time, which time, how soon, when, and where. So meaning if you said to somebody, hey, what works best, afternoons or evenings? That is saying which time. That's just another version of which time. So there's only 5 ways. What time, which time, how soon, when, and where. All right, what other questions you guys got for me? Yeah, you're welcome, Carla. Okay, well, good. Well, thanks for being with me today, guys. So here's what, Tuesday next week, I'm going to still have to be doing it here at home, but Tuesday next week is going to be the working your sphere of influence. And here's what I will tell you. I don't care if you've attended that class before. If you are not generating income from your sphere of influence, you need to come to that class every single time I teach it until you start to get business flowing from your sphere of influence. Because I'm telling you, of everything I'm going to teach you, that class on Tuesday is the most important one for working your sphere of influence, and it will work. It is 100% guaranteed to work. And so if you're not seeing business from that, come back to the class because you missed some stuff from it. So anyway, I'll send an email to the ones that I show have not attended. But anyway, hey, thanks for being with me, guys. And we will chat later on. And like I said, I'm more than happy to help. Just track your time on that and bring it to me, and then we'll go through it. So, all right, thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Russ.
Yeah, thanks, David. See ya.
Hey, Russ,
Yeah, go ahead.
did you say that you emailed out that time chart to everybody?
Yeah.
Could you email me that? I don't know if I ever got it.
Okay, let me make sure I have you. Yeah, I've got your, let me make sure the email I have. I have Corbin Hyde, Utah Listings Pro at Gmail.
Yeah.
Okay. I will send it to you right now. Oops.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.